Welcome back. It's a particularly nice and sunny day, although it's a bit windy and cooler than I'd like it to be, but at least it's still a nice day out. And as you could probably tell by either the title of this video or the actual picture you're looking at here, it's time to cut the lawn. And this is actually the first time I've done the lawn this season, but you can see it definitely needs it. And I figured, I see a lot of these videos on YouTube here on people doing cold starts. And boy, do I have a cold start for you. See, unfortunately, I don't have any room in my shed for my mower, so it has to live outside of the shed. And yeah, it stayed here all year, and it's covered in leaves from the fall. It got snowed on. We got quite a bit of snow this year. The thing was buried in snow, and well, it's still buried in leaves because it's actually not moved from that position. Now, I know a lot of people are out there saying, how could you treat your lawnmower like that? This thing is one of those El Cheapo mowers my wife bought when she moved into this place before she even met me. And considering that we're going to be together some close to 12 years, you can get how old this thing is. So it's done well for us. And even though some things are falling apart on it, not because necessarily the way it's stored, it did live in the shed for quite a while. But it's an old mower. It's an old Craftsman mower with a 6.5 horsepower Briggs & Stratton engine. Little things like the little block on there that keeps the clippings in so the mulching mechanism works broke off years ago. We've already replaced the front tires on it. It's had a good run. But that being said, this thing usually works pretty darn well for us, despite the lack of good keepings, you can say. And well, one of the things I can tell you about this is, unfortunately, we have a larger gas tank than we actually need. So when it's time to fuel up, we fill the thing, and I think it's like 2.5 gallons. And my yard here is not very big, so we don't really use that gas up every season. And again, I know a lot of you are out there saying, oh, you use regular gas station gas in there with ethanol in it? Well, yes, I do. And I know it's not the best thing, but you know what? It's been working for us for so long, I don't really see much issue with it. Although I never really knew about True Fuel or any of those other things before, so now that I know they exist, I'm sure I'll be using stuff like that in the near future. But it's probably been a good 3 years at least that I can remember last getting gas for this thing. So we'll see. I'm going to pull out what I have in the shed now and take a look at it, and we're also going to pull that thing out. And I'm going to do all this live on camera right now, so we'll all see, without any camera tricks, without any editing or anything like that, what this thing actually will do or not. Now, I can say I do change the oil every year in it, and I think I changed it before the end of the season last season. I only cut the lawn maybe a dozen or so times in a year because the particular grass that's here doesn't really grow a lot. There's some spots, like you can see just behind the mower there and under this tree, where it does grow pretty high. Other spots it hardly grows at all. In fact, I'll show you that now. You can see all this over here is quite low. In fact, some of this really isn't even grass, it's just weeds more or less. But nonetheless, it's still a green looking lawn. And the front yard's a lot thicker, so that gets cut more frequently, but it is what it is. But anyway, we're going to pull that out, and we'll take a look at what the oil looks like, and we'll get this thing started. One last thing I'll say before I go do any of this, the spark plug was recently changed. I got one of those split fire type plugs. And as you can even tell by the gas tank, it's quite old looking. It's probably as old as the mower. And yeah, I know it's a little scuzzy looking, but that's just because it's just a damp environment in the shed, and things just get filthy no matter what you do to them in there, honestly. But that's neither here nor there. Now, keep in mind, there is no stable or fuel stabilizer or anything like that poured into this gas at the end of every season. It's just whatever I have left over. So we're going to go ahead now and pull that mower out and see what everything here looks like. And as you could probably tell, it looks like something from the swamp. It's just covered in leaves pretty horribly. But I have confidence this thing is just going to start up the minute we go ahead and pull the trigger on it here. First thing I'm going to do is go ahead and clean up all the leaves around and everything. surprisingly, it's still pretty clean. There's no rust on there or anything like that, despite there being all those rotting leaves on top of it. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move the camera just a little bit closer here where you can take a really good up-close look at this thing. Now let's take a look at the oil on it. It seems like it was, so it's a little dark, but it's not that bad. Doesn't smell like it's burned or anything like that. And given the amount of cuttings I do with this thing, it's probably fine, but I'm most likely going to change this. Not right now, but I will change this before I use it again. I actually am going to be cleaning my shed out here in the next couple days. It's a bit crowded in there, so it's hard to get to all my supplies, but we'll definitely take a look at that and get that thing cleaned up. The other thing I will look at is, did I actually empty the fuel out of it at the end of the season? Well, it does have fuel in it. Maybe about half a tank. It still smells like gas. So let's see. I'm going to prime this, and I'm going to start it and see what happens. Or at least attempt to start it. Well, hot damn. Didn't think that thing was actually going to really start. Well, I had little doubt that the thing was going to start. But for some reason I said, nah, you know, I'm going to get the camera out, I'm going to do this, and it's not going to go. And well, as you saw, it went. And I think it went pretty good. Now, there was a good puff of white smoke that came out of it, but you know what? Given this thing was sitting for so long in such a crappy condition, I'm not surprised, honestly. The only thing I really remember doing was about midway through the season last year, I hit a big root, and the root ended up busting the blade. You know, it caused the motor to stop right away, and I kind of got the crap scared out of me. And then I said, you know, I wonder if I can start this thing back up again. And when I did, the thing vibrated like a son of a gun. So I flipped it over and realized that the blade had just completely bent. Like, it had, the whole end of it was just done. So I had to get a new blade for it. But that was it. That's all I really did to the thing. And I think it sounds pretty good. It sounds very healthy for considering it's an older mower. But with that, I'm going to go ahead and cut the lawn, and I'll be back in just a moment. Now, while it may seem surprising that this thing started up so easily, that's the way it's been every year we've owned this thing. Every time you start it, it starts on one pull. Especially since I put that new spark plug in, and it seemed like that really made a big difference. It's probably silly saying that because it's just a simple spark plug, but you know, in all honesty, it just seems like it's just a touch more powerful than it used to be back in the day. But I always remember this thing starting up on one pull, especially just coming out of storage like that. But we'll just pan up here real quick and see. It did do a great job of cutting the lawn. But you may see that there are some areas that need some trim work. So that's a good segue into the next segment of this video, and that's going to be looking at our trimmer. And in case you're wondering what roots I end up hitting, this particular tree over here has a lot of roots sticking up, and probably can't see it in the shadows or the shade right now, but there's some big guys like that guy there, and obviously I'm not going to cut over that thing, but some of the lower lying ones, especially when the grass gets a little taller around that area, ends up becoming a little bit of a problem. So you do have to watch around there. In fact, some of that stuff I end up saving for when I get the trimmer out. So I'm going to do just that right now. Now this guy is a Troybuilt 4-cycle trimmer, and the reason why I went with 4-cycle is I don't like having to mix gas and oil. Plus it's another fuel tank I have to have. I already don't go through the fuel enough to merit having as big of a fuel tank as I have for the lawnmower. I certainly didn't want to have another tank for this guy, because it seems like every other grass cutting gets a trimming. And I have zero confidence in this thing starting up right away. This has always been an issue. Even right out of the box, it takes quite a few pulls to get this thing to go. And I think that's just with every trimmer. I mean, I know nowadays they have little electric start jammies you can plug in the back of the thing and get the start that way. And of course that would be really nice to have. But that being said, when it does run, it is quite a powerful little bugger. And it's a little bit lighter, as it does say in the front. It's lightweight, more torque. You don't have to mix gas. Now, if I knew back in the day about True Fuel, I wouldn't worry about it. I would just have gotten that and, you know, gone with that, no problem. But one of the things I do have to do is replace the string. And this is a dual string machine, so we do have to wind that up. And you may notice this little red dial over here. This is actually a little implement that you can take off and turn it into something else. Another reason why I bought it. But I really don't use that functionality to it. So for all intent and purpose, I could have had an electric trimmer for the size of the yard I have. I mean, the boundaries are basically right behind that bush is the end of my trailer. I can't really go beyond that. I mean, I do cut the other side because the park actually cuts some people's lawns, but that's if you pay for the maintenance. And newer residents have to pay for the maintenance. Older people like us that have been here for a while are grandfathered in, so we get to save, you know, quite a bit of money every month not having the maintenance as part of it. But we do have to cut the lawn and clean up the leaves and all that stuff, but they don't touch the snow, so I didn't really feel much need for that. In case you're wondering, I don't have a leaf blower. I can't stand those things. Just that constant droning drives me nuts. So my wife and I rake this yard by hand every year. It's a good workout. The problem with that is this pine tree up here, as you can see. There's a lot of needles on it, and it ends up being quite a pain in the neck sometimes to clean all that up. The front yard is very little leaves. There's, well, one tree there in the neighbor's yard you could see, which isn't very big at all. But these guys behind the trailer, these huge trees, they rain down leaves for months, and they're kind of a pain in the neck. I traded my leaf chipper for a Shopsmith, which is buried in my shed here, and we'll take a look at that in the near future once I get that thing out, because it's an old piece of machinery. But nonetheless, let's get onto this trimmer. I'm a bit stalling right now. Now this, we start with 2 equal lengths of string. I usually don't put too much on there, just because it's easier to spool, and frankly sometimes it just ends up flying out on me anyway. Before you ask, I am using the correct size for this. There are different thicknesses. In fact, the reason why I have this particular string is because my father accidentally picked up the wrong size years ago, and I had the wrong size, he had the wrong size, so we ended up just switching with each other. But the way this works is you just take one of these and you feed it through the spool here, and it will pop up, and there's a little hole right there. You can probably see light coming through, and you insert the end of it all the way through. And since it's this spiral stuff, it's a little tricky, but you can see it goes right through, and then you pull it tight. You do the same thing with the other string here. Just pass it through and find that hole, shove it in that hole, push it all the way down, and then pull it tight, and then you wrap it. And you want to wrap this in the natural direction that it goes around, and I'm just going to go ahead and do that. And then when I'm done, you're going to even see it says rewind line. It gives you the direction. I'm actually going to poke those little lines out here through these holders here, and that's it. Pretty easy. And this is towards the end of the actual roll that I have in the shed, so it has a natural coil to it. So as you're wrapping this around, if you coil it in the natural direction around the coil, the actual spool here, it makes it a little bit easier to install. And they don't need to be exact length when it comes out. It just happened to work out that way for me. So now it's time to get it in the end of the machine here. And to do that, that's pretty easy. You can see there's one of the holes here. There's another one over here. And you just bring these back out of their little holders and kind of just sneak them into that hole. I mean, that's really all there is to it. Now this can get a little fiddly, so hopefully I could do this without the whole thing unwrapping on me. But we should be able to just get that right in there. And it does get hung up in some spots, like right up here it's getting hung up on me. If you just shove the string in, tighten it down, that should be it. And I just got to tighten the nut on the end here. That's it. And then this is obviously the button, so when you bump this against the ground, these should come out. So if you give it a push, you should be able to pull it. We'll do the one more. And this is just off here is where the little blade is that this whacks up against to and cuts. So just to make this a little easier on the unit, I'm going to go ahead and trim those with a little trimmer here, just by hand, just to get it out of the way now. Now it's time to fuel this thing up, which is kind of a pain in the neck, honestly. When she picked this gas tank up, she didn't really have any idea what she was getting. She just grabbed the tank, honestly. But it has one of these devices on here that's supposed to shut it off when it gets full. I mean the actual device you're fueling. So there's a little lip over here, and this lip's supposed to sit in the edge of the fuel tank, and then when you push down on it, this thing opens up and allows the fuel to come out. And you can see it sticks. It's just not a good design, honestly. I'm not a fan of that. I'm not that old, but I've grown up with older fuel tanks, which are much easier to work with and don't have any of these safety features on it, so you just turn it and pour it. You don't have to worry about any nonsense like this. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. And then it's a matter of priming it and then setting this little blue lever over here, which is your choke, just to get it set just right. And it's a pain in the neck, but we'll see if we can get this thing started. Again, I have no confidence in it, but we'll see what happens. Well, as you probably could imagine, that didn't go as smoothly as I wanted it to. I did manage to get some gas spilled outside of it, so I used my shop rag over here to clean it up. And as I'm wiping along over here, those two little hoses decide to pop out and spray some fuel all over. Nice. Gasoline's one of those things. It has a kind of interesting smell to it, but you don't want to smell it too long because you know it's bad for you. But you can't help smelling it because it's interesting. I guess interesting is the right way to say that. Maybe it smells more like cancer. Alright, now in all seriousness, before I start this up, I want to check the oil on it, just like we did with the mower. Again, this is a 4-cycle, so this does take oil. This little red plug over here is how you both fill it and check it. So as long as this is on a level surface, and you can see it's resting on the fuel tank in the back here, and if I pan upwards here, the other thing it's resting on is the little D-shaped handle, and then of course the implement at the very end over there is actually hanging outright. Now you could do this a couple ways. You could do it like that, as I have here. It's just sitting on top of a pallet, which is on a bunch of cinder blocks. Or you can actually just take the implement right off the end of it by adjusting that little red knob there that's in the center of your screen. And you could take it off that way, and you don't have that little shield sticking out to make this thing not properly level. Because if you don't, you'll end up just spilling all the oil everywhere. But we will take a look at that. The spark plug in this has never been changed, but frankly it doesn't get used that much. I probably should change it, but I'm not going to right now. We'll explore that in a future video possibly. Now let's get that nut out and check the oil. It looks like it's a bit low. In fact, it should be just level with the threads here. And it's quite dirty. So I think this might be a good time to actually at least put some in here, because it should be level with those threads on that hole. Well, in all honesty, I just can't get to the oil right now. It's going to take me at least a good 20 minutes to get everything out of the way to get to it. And I don't really have time for that, honestly, at this particular time. And don't really have too much more time to be working on this particular shooting. So I'm gonna just put this plug back into this thing and just at least see if we get this thing fired up and just do a quick trim job around the yard here. I have to do some errands before my wife gets home from work. She's actually working late today, so I want to make sure I have time to do that, obviously. So I'm just going to go ahead, like I said, plug this up, and we'll have another video where I change the oil in this and the mower at the same time. And here's a look at the starting instructions. If you want to read those, you can go ahead and pause it. But that's what I'm going to follow right now as we attempt to start this thing. Alright, the primer is primed. It's time to pull the trigger and give this thing a start and see what happens. I told you I had no confidence in this thing running. I'm gonna go ahead and let this set for just a moment, just in case it's flooded. I did only pump it to 10 times as mentioned, and well, it's not going. So I'm gonna actually let that just sit for a second. I'm gonna try to see if I can find my socket set to pop the spark plug off. Strike that, cancel it. My wife has my van and I have her car, and all my tools are in that van. So I'll have to wait for her to get home to mess with that. Unless I feel like sitting here just screwing around with it and seeing if I can get it started the old-fashioned way. You know, I just ended up putting the little rubber boot back on the spark plug, and without squeezing the trigger, I gave this a pull, and it started for just a split second. So let's see if we can just brute force start this thing. What do I gotta lose, right? Come on. Did I ever say I hated small engines? I'm sure someone's screaming at the screen right now saying, I know what you're doing wrong. But unfortunately, I can't hear you. It'll go. See, I knew it would go. I'm gonna let it run like that for just a minute and see what happens. But yeah, they're not that easy, and they never really have been for me. Despite what fuel I use in it, despite how I store it, this thing does live in the shed. But nevertheless, it's running right now for just a few minutes. We'll see what happens if I can get this thing to run a little bit better. If I change the choke over here, let's see. I don't want to choke it out, you know, give it too much air. I do like the way 4-cycle small motors like the sound, though, I have to say. Alright, I'll be back in a few minutes once I get this thing nicely warmed up. Damn it. Well, managed to get the thing to run long enough to actually trim the yard. And then I get over here back to the camera just to show something off on it, and the thing died, and I said, you know what, that's that. No reason to play around with it anymore. Frankly, it started better than I thought it would. I know I was cussing and cursing and fussing over it for a little while there, but it did run, and that's all that was important. Of course, it needs to have a little bit of maintenance done on it, but all in all, it ran pretty well. It started, and that's all I care about right now at this point. So with that, I want to thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next video.